Charlie Angus is one of the longest-serving MPs in Parliament. He's been there 20 years. He's a kook as much as any NDPer is, but because he's in his 60s, he's a bit less woke than the newer crop of NDP MPs. So he's a bit less, let's say, insane on things like Hamas than his newer colleagues are. But I think he's trying to close the crazy gap with the youngsters and take the lead. I'm making light of things, but I shouldn't, because this private members bill that he just introduced, while it's surely doomed to failure, it's going to get dozens of votes in Parliament if it comes to a vote, which is uncertain for private members' bills. But if it did, we would get the NDP, we would get the Greens, we would get the Bloc, and probably a few Liberals. The private members' bills, because they're usually doomed to failure, are often ways that ideas are injected into the system for a tryout. What's radical today is edgy tomorrow and conventional wisdom the next day, and then after that it's the law. And often NDP ideas are taken up by the Liberals, who normalize what was once extreme. Trudeau does that a lot, actually. The proposed law I'm talking about, introduced by Charlie Angus, is called C-372, the Fossil Fuel Advertising Act. I'm going to read a little bit of it, and then I'm going to play you a clip of Charlie Angus talking about it. It was introduced on Monday. Let's look through it a bit. Here's the preamble. Whereas climate change represents an unprecedented and existential threat to people in Canada and around the world. Is that true, actually? Are we all going to die? When's that supposed to kick in? I thought Al Gore said there wouldn't be snow anymore by now. Is it really an existential threat if everything's sort of the same? Whereas extreme weather events such as the 2021 heat dome in British Columbia are already proving deadly in Canada, and according to Health Canada, they are expected to increase in frequency and magnitude due to climate change. Whereas in 2023, Canada experienced the worst wildfire season ever recorded as the country exceeded the largest area ever burned in a year, totaling more than 7.9 million hectares. Yeah, that was pretty bad. And it was arson that did that. So you do you, but maybe the cops should track down that arsonist. Whereas the government of Canada has made international climate commitments to drastically reduce fossil fuel consumption and to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, which requires the timely phase-out of fossil fuels. Why do leftists always care about international promises and keeping promises to foreigners, as if anyone in any country in the world says, hey, Canada promised to reduce their emissions. I'm mad at Canada for not keeping their promise to me. Do you think a citizen of Senegal or New Zealand or Cambodia has ever said those words in their life? Why do leftists put other countries ahead of their own countries? Whereas the protection of the environment is a valid use of the federal criminal law power. Really? So they want to criminalize views they don't like. It's the same with their proposal to criminalize denial of mass graves at Indigenous Indian residential schools. You're not allowed to criticize the narrative. That's a crime they want to do. By the way, good luck with that constitutional jurisdiction of telling Albertans they can't talk about oil and gas. I'll keep reading. Where I'm still in the preamble, by the way, that you can just see it's lie upon lie. Whereas air pollution caused by fossil fuels leads to millions of premature deaths globally, including tens of thousands of premature deaths in Canada alone, and is a major cause of cancer, respiratory illness, adverse pregnancy outcomes, children's diseases, and cardiovascular symptoms. I doubt that very much. Actually, there is air pollution problems in much of the world, but it's not from oil and gas. It's from, in many cases, burning dung, burning things that are not clean fuels, not even burning coal. I challenge those stats. I think it's actually the opposite. If you've ever read some of the Alex Epstein's work, he's a fossil fuel advocate. I think he makes a pretty convincing case that life expectancy and fossil fuel consumption go hand in hand. The more fossil fuels you have, the less you're burning wood and dung and other things like that, and more you're cooling your house in the summer, warming it into the winter, transportation. It's just the opposite of what Charlie Angus is saying. And you'd think he'd know. I'll get back to that in a minute. Keep reading the preamble. Whereas fossil fuel production and consumption has resulted in a national public health crisis of substantial and pressing concern in a way that is similar to the public health crisis caused by tobacco consumption. You just made that up. didn't you? You just made that up. You just put those words on a paper. But you can tell they're using health crises for any authoritarianism they were practicing during the pandemic. They're still going through the recitals here, but again, I want to show you what's in their mind. Whereas in 1989, Parliament restricted tobacco advertising and sponsorship to reduce tobacco use to respond to that public health crisis. Yeah, that's true. And I don't know if you noticed, though, but pretty much every strip mall in this country has one or even two cannabis stores. And in every major and some minor cities in this country, there's injection sites. So yeah, if I was Charlie Angus, I wouldn't be boasting too much about how people aren't doing nicotine because they're doing much harder drugs with the blessing of Trudeau and the provincial governments. Whereas in the context of a climate emergency, fossil fuel advertising sends a confusing and contradictory message about the need to urgently end Canada's reliance on fossil fuels. Really? Is Canada the problem here? Canada is a rounding error, not even close to 1% of global emissions. How come Canada has to shut down our industry and censor our people? How come China is never mentioned by the Liberals or the NDP as a source of emissions, fake emissions, or even real emissions like real pollution? And I think this is the last line in the preamble. And whereas Parliament is of the opinion that fossil fuel advertising currently deploys techniques which knowingly mislead the public and fail to disclose the health and environmental harms associated with their use, impeding informed consumer decision-making, undermining public support for effective climate action, and delaying the transition to safer, cleaner energy sources. Yeah, people are fooled by using oil and gas. And if only we would stop the lies, they would throw away their cars, turn off their gas furnaces. And did you see some of the snow in the Atlantic lately? Just check out some of these images. Pretty sure they're not being cleared by Teslas or other rechargeable cars. Let me get back to the bill. Now, therefore, His Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate of the House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follows. So I just read through the preamble to show you that their thinking was, here's the law. Let's get into the law. I'm not going to spend that much time here, but I wanted to show you what was on their mind. This act may be cited as the Fossil Fuel Advertising Act. And then they have some definitions. The following definitions apply in this act. Brand element includes a brand name, trademark, trade name, distinguishing guise, logo, graphic arrangement, design, or slogan that is reasonably associated or evokes a product, a service, or a brand of product or service, but does not include a color. I'm going to skip ahead. I just want to read a couple definitions. Fossil fuel means a fuel that, in whole or in part, is or is derived from petroleum, natural gas, or related hydrocarbons. It excludes a fuel that consists only of non-fossilized, biodegradable organic material that originates from plants or animals, but does not originate from a geological formation, including gases and liquids that are recovered from the decomposition of organic waste. Hang on a second, how's that fair? If we're trying to fight emissions, why are emissions from other sources banned? I mean, other than the fact that the NDP hates Alberta and oil and gas jobs. Promotion, this is what they're really bad. This I really want to highlight. This is what they're making illegal. Promotion means a representation about a product or service by any means, whether directly or indirectly, including any communication of information about the product or service and its price and distribution that is likely to influence and shape attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors about the product or service. So no more coupons, no more 5 cents off or 3 cents off, no more advertising on where to get cheaper gas. That's all illegal because that's promotion now. You will pay more. No more coupons. Charlie Angus doesn't think you're paying enough for your gas. Do you think so?
Big Oil has always relied on the big tobacco playbook of delay and disinformation. And so to tackle this immense threat to human health, we need to use many of the strategies that finally took down big tobacco. In 1997, the Canadian Parliament banned advertising from big tobacco because of the clear threat to human health. This is why I'm so proud to stand here today with representatives of Canada's medical community to state that the time has come to ban all oil and gas advertising. The big tobacco moment has finally arrived for big oil. Bill C-372 will, quote, provide a legislative response to a national public health and environmental problem of substantial and pressing concerns. The bill will make it illegal for big oil and gas lobby and the gas lobby or their front groups or paid influencers to falsely promote the burning of fossil fuels as a benefit to the public. The legislation will make it illegal to falsely claim that the use of one fossil fuel product is somehow better than another fossil fuel product in improving the environment. To claim that there are clean fossil fuels is like saying there are safe cigarettes. We know that is simply not true. Morgan Stanley points out that the damage from climate crisis for the North American economy in just 3 years has been a staggering $415 billion. And this legislation will target advertising that falsely claims that oil and gas are having a positive impact on the global economy. And we recently learned that toxic contamination from Canada's oil and gas industry is 6,000 times higher than officially reported. This legislation will make it illegal for Canada's oil and gas giants to falsely identify themselves with the health and positive lifestyles of Canadians or with reconciliation of Indigenous people on whose lands the toxic contamination is highest. The big tobacco moment has arrived for companies like Suncor, Imperial, and the oil and gas giants of Canada.